The airport pulsed with its usual rhythm, a symphony of movement and sound blending into a backdrop of anticipation. Rolling suitcases clattered against polished tiles, while distant announcements echoed overhead, muffled by the chatter of travelers. People milled around, some moving with purpose, others lingering in quiet contemplation as they awaited their turn to embark on their journeys. Amid this controlled chaos stood Gate 14, buzzing with life and expectation. Flight 739 to Aspen was nearing final boarding, and among the passengers stood Olivia Bennett, a woman who appeared as composed as the polished floors beneath her feet. Olivia moved with a quiet elegance that turned heads without her trying. Her tall, poised frame was adorned in a perfectly tailored navy suit, a picture of sophistication and grace. Around her neck, a silk scarf, its rich hues complementing her complexion, added a personal touch to her otherwise professional attire. It was a gift from her husband, Michael, a token of love she cherished deeply. Her polished leather handbag, a subtle symbol of understated wealth, rested lightly against her side as she approached the gate agent. Her gaze was steady, her stride purposeful, and her expression calm. To an observer, Olivia exuded confidence and refinement, but beneath her composed exterior lay a keen awareness of the world around her, a world that often tested her resolve in ways others couldn't fathom. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice smooth yet polite as she handed her boarding pass to the young gate agent. The agent, a man in his early 20s with a slightly nervous demeanor, hesitated as he scanned her ticket. His eyes darted briefly toward a figure standing nearby, Captain Jonathan Blake. Blake, the pilot for Flight 739, leaned casually against the counter, his tall frame exuding an air of authority that bordered on arrogance. His uniform was immaculate, but it was his smirk, a faint yet unmistakable tug at the corner of his lips that hinted at something less professional. At first, Blake appeared uninterested in the interaction unfolding before him, but when Olivia's composed figure caught his attention, his demeanor shifted. His eyes narrowed slightly as he straightened, his smirk widening as if he had just discovered something that amused him. The gate agent, visibly uncomfortable, finished scanning Olivia's ticket and was about to gesture her forward when Blake interjected. "Excuse me," Blake said, his tone smooth but laced with condescension. "Ma'am, are you sure you're at the right gate?" Olivia turned to face him, her dark eyes unwavering and her posture unshaken. "Quite sure," she replied, her voice calm and measured. Blake chuckled softly, the sound sharp and grating. "It's just unusual," he continued, his words dripping with implication. "We don't often see first-class passengers like—" His sentence trailed off deliberately, leaving the unspoken insult hanging in the air like a storm cloud. The gate agent shifted nervously, his unease growing by the second. Olivia, however, maintained her composure, though a flicker of frustration danced behind her calm exterior. She had heard this kind of remark before, too many times to count, and though she had grown adept at handling such moments, the sting never entirely disappeared. "Is there an issue with my ticket?" she asked, her voice cool, her words cutting through the tension like a blade. Blake's smirk deepened. "I'd just like to verify a few things before you board," he said, his tone feigning politeness but betraying his true intent. Olivia tilted her head slightly, her gaze unwavering. "You're the pilot," she pointed out. "Are ticket checks part of your duties now?" The murmurs of nearby passengers began to rise, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding scene. Some exchanged uneasy glances, while others openly stared, their expressions a mix of discomfort and intrigue. Blake didn't back down. "I like to ensure everything runs smoothly on my flights. Protocol, you know." The crowd's whispers grew louder, but Olivia refused to let the weight of their attention break her composure. Instead, she met Blake's condescending gaze with quiet defiance. "If there's a problem," she said firmly, "I'd like to know what it is. Otherwise, I'd appreciate being allowed to board." For a moment, Blake's smug expression faltered, but he quickly recovered, his arrogance undeterred. "Security concerns," he said vaguely, his words carefully chosen to mask his true intent. "We've had some incidents lately, you understand." Olivia's jaw tightened ever so slightly, but her voice remained steady. She understood perfectly well what he was implying, though he lacked the courage to say it outright. "I'll contact my husband," she said simply, reaching for her phone. Blake laughed, the sound dripping with mockery. "Oh, by all means," he said. "But no phone call is going to change the rules." Ignoring him, Olivia dialed. "Michael," she said calmly when the line picked up. "I need you at gate 14. Now." Blake's smirk widened as he leaned back against the counter, his confidence unchecked. "No one's coming to save you," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for her to hear. Olivia slid her phone back into her bag and stepped aside. "I'll wait," she said simply, her posture unbroken and her quiet defiance unshaken. As the minutes ticked by, the tension at gate 14 grew thicker. Passengers whispered behind cupped hands, sneaking glances at Olivia and Blake. Some seemed to admire her poise, while others appeared to revel in the drama. But Olivia stood firm, her calm resolve like an anchor amid the swirling sea of judgment and curiosity. She knew one thing for certain: this moment would not define her. It was merely a prelude to a larger reckoning, one she was more than prepared to face. The air in the terminal seemed to shift as Olivia waited. Her quiet defiance drew stares and whispers, but she refused to let the scrutiny crack her composure. The murmurs around her swelled, passengers debating among themselves, guessing at the confrontation's cause. Some dismissed it as a misunderstanding, while others suspected something deeper. But Olivia, standing tall and poised, betrayed nothing. Minutes passed with agonizing slowness. Captain Blake, still leaning casually against the counter, occasionally threw her a glance laced with smug satisfaction. He relished the attention, basking in the unspoken authority he wielded, unaware of the storm about to descend. When Michael Bennett arrived, it was like a thunderclap cutting through the murmurs. His presence was commanding, magnetic even, as he strode through the terminal with purposeful confidence. The crowd instinctively parted for him, their curiosity replaced by a sudden sense of awe. Michael's sharply tailored suit was immaculate, his polished shoes clicking against the tiles with each decisive step. His dark eyes scanned the scene until they found Olivia. Though she stood firm, her shoulders were subtly tense, a detail only Michael would notice. His jaw tightened, a flicker of anger crossing his features before he reined it in. "Michael," Olivia said softly, her voice steady but tinged with relief. He reached her side in an instant, his hand lightly brushing hers in silent reassurance. Then his attention shifted, his gaze locking onto Blake like a predator sizing up its prey. "I'd like an explanation," Michael said, his voice low and even, yet carrying a weight that silenced the surrounding whispers. "Why is my wife being prevented from boarding?" Blake straightened, his posture stiffening as he prepared to defend himself. His earlier confidence wavered under Michael's piercing stare, but he clung to his facade. "I'm ensuring the safety of my passengers," Blake replied smoothly, though his tone lacked the conviction it had before. "Your wife raised some concerns?" Michael's brow furrowed, his expression sharpening. "Concerns?" he repeated, his voice dangerously calm. "She presented a valid ticket, didn't she?" "Well, yes," Blake admitted reluctantly, glancing at the gate agent as if hoping for support. The young man averted his gaze, clearly unwilling to get involved. "But I have the authority," Blake continued, "to make decisions regarding passenger safety." Michael took a step closer, his towering presence swallowing the remaining space between them. The tension in the room was palpable, the crowd now utterly silent as they watched the confrontation unfold. "And what, exactly," Michael said, his tone razor-sharp, "about my wife makes her a safety concern?" Blake faltered. His mouth opened as if to respond, but no words came out. The bravado he had worn so confidently moments ago seemed to crumble under Michael's relentless gaze. "I don't have to justify my decisions to you," Blake finally managed, though his voice lacked its earlier strength. "You do now," Michael said, each word cutting through the air like ice. The silence that followed was deafening. Blake's jaw tightened as he struggled to maintain his composure, but the cracks in his armor were evident. "And who exactly do you think you are?" Blake asked, attempting to sound defiant, but coming off as defensive. Michael's expression didn't waver. "Michael Bennett," he said coldly, his voice carrying an authority that left no room for doubt. "Owner of this airline." The revelation hit the room like a tidal wave. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and the gate agent froze, his face draining of color as he fumbled with the tickets in his hand. Even Blake, who had been so smug moments ago, paled visibly. "Your actions today," Michael continued, his voice rising just enough to carry across the gathered crowd, "haven't just humiliated my wife. They've jeopardized the integrity of this company and everything it stands for." Blake opened his mouth to respond, but Michael cut him off. "I demand an explanation," Michael said, his voice like steel. "Now." Blake stammered, his arrogance evaporating as panic began to set in. I was just following protocol," he said weakly. Michael's eyes narrowed. "Do not insult my intelligence by hiding behind protocol," he said sharply. "This was prejudice, plain and simple, and it ends here." As if on cue, 2 security officers arrived, summoned quietly by the gate staff. Their presence only heightened the tension, their steady gazes fixed on Blake. Michael turned to them with a calm yet commanding demeanor. "Escort him off this flight," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And consider this his last day in uniform." Blake's protests grew louder, his voice rising in desperation as he tried to plead his case. But the security officers were unmoved, their firm grip on his arm silencing him as they led him away. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Blake disappeared from view, his cries fading into the distance. A smattering of applause broke out among the passengers, hesitant at first but growing stronger. The sound seemed to cut through the lingering tension, replacing it with a sense of justice finally served. Michael turned back to Olivia, his expression softening as he met her gaze. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle now, filled with concern. Olivia managed a faint smile, her composure unbroken. "I am now," she said simply. Michael nodded, then turned to the gate staff. "Ensure Mrs. Bennett is boarded first," he instructed, his voice regaining its authoritative edge. "And make sure she's treated with the courtesy she deserves." "Yes, sir." "Right away," the gate agent stammered, hastily scanning Olivia's boarding pass with trembling hands. As Olivia stepped onto the jet bridge, she felt the weight of the incident still lingering in the air. But she held her head high, her quiet dignity intact. This wasn't just about her. It was about something far greater. The ripples of this moment, she knew, would stretch far beyond Gate 14. Change was coming, and she would ensure it arrived. As Olivia made her way down the jet bridge, she could feel the lingering gaze of the passengers still heavy upon her. Some stared in awe, others with newfound respect. But there were those who remained silent, too uncomfortable to meet her eyes. She knew the moment had left its mark on everyone, but it wasn't just about what had happened. It was about what would happen next. The encounter at Gate 14 had been more than a personal confrontation. It had been a catalyst, a spark that would ignite a fire of change within an industry too often defined by its biases and its unspoken prejudices. And while Olivia had been the one to bear the brunt of the injustice, she knew her actions, her unwavering stance, had altered something far bigger than the course of her flight to Aspen. As the plane ascended into the sky, the familiar hum of the engine seemed to settle Olivia's thoughts, grounding her once again. The view from the window was breathtaking. Snow-capped mountains in the distance, the early morning light casting a soft glow across the landscape. Yet, her mind remained sharp, focused. Her phone buzzed on the seat beside her, and Olivia reached for it, her fingers brushing the screen to reveal a message from Michael. "I'm proud of you, but this isn't over. It's just the beginning." Asterisk. She smiled faintly, a wave of gratitude washing over her. Michael had always been her rock, her unwavering support in times of uncertainty. But today, she had stood on her own, and it had felt empowering in ways she hadn't expected. The incident at Gate 14 had shaken her, yes, but it had also ignited a spark within her, one that refused to be snuffed out. A stewardess passed by, offering a friendly smile, her demeanor warm and professional. Olivia returned the smile, noting the subtle shift in the atmosphere among the flight attendants. The subtle tension that had existed before, The unspoken awareness of who she was and the assumption that it might shield her from inconvenience had dissipated. The environment was different now, not just for Olivia, but for everyone on board. Her mind drifted back to the face of Captain Blake, the arrogance in his eyes, the judgment veiled under the guise of concern. It had been too much. But what struck her most was the way he had so easily assumed power over her, the way he had believed that his position gave him the right to question her presence without cause. He had forgotten, or perhaps never fully understood, that no one, no matter their position, was above scrutiny. The realization solidified within her. This was bigger than the man in a uniform. This was about a system, a culture, that needed to change. She wasn't merely fighting for herself. She was fighting for all the women, all the marginalized, who had silently borne the brunt of this kind of treatment for years. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft ping of an incoming email. Olivia glanced at her phone, her eyes narrowing as she read the subject line. Corporate inquiry. Gate 14 incident. A sense of calm determination filled her. She had expected this. The airline would be conducting an internal investigation, no doubt, trying to save face in the wake of the scandal. But Olivia knew this was just the beginning. If Captain Blake had any hope of maintaining his position, he would have to answer to a much higher authority than the one he had arrogantly believed he wielded. As the plane cruised through the sky, Olivia felt the weight of the moment settle into her bones. This wasn't a battle she had asked for, but it was one she would see through to the end. The steps she had taken at Gate 14 were only the first. The real work was just beginning. By the time the flight touched down in Aspen, the world had already started to change. The email inboxes of corporate leaders were filling with messages of support for Olivia and demands for accountability. Social media was buzzing with reactions, some applauding Olivia for her poise, others criticizing the airline for its handling of the situation. But amidst the noise, one truth rang clear. Olivia Bennett's actions had sparked a conversation that couldn't be silenced. As the plane taxied to the gate, Olivia gathered her things, her heart steady and her resolve stronger than ever. She was ready for whatever came next, knowing that she would face it head-on with the same quiet strength she had demonstrated at Gate 14. Michael was waiting for her at the terminal, his tall frame easily visible among the crowd. When she approached, he gave her a brief, approving smile. There was no need for words. He could see it in her eyes. "I know," she said simply, offering him a smile in return, and together, they walked out of the airport, the sun shining brightly in the distance, a symbol of the new dawn that had begun. The world, it seemed, was ready for change, and Olivia Bennett was leading the charge.